Welcome back, Covalence friends. Today we're going to be going through a long part 3 of building a Reddit client using Next.js and Tailwind. I apologize for the length, but there's a lot of information to get through. We're going to be retrieving the posts from Reddit. We're going to do it two different ways, right? So there's different use cases for different models, different scenarios, and we're going to be first creating our own API and using it as a pass-through entity to send a fetch from the client through our API and then retrieve the post from Reddit. The second way is going to be using get server-side props, which is a Next.js function, and we're going to be using that to render the page server-side, right? Different benefits to both. Server-side rendering has a lot of SEO potential, and for this particular case, either one works, but we're going to be going forward using the server-side one. So if you want to skip ahead and go directly to that, you can. It's a lot quicker. It's a lot shorter as well. So again, sit back, relax, and hope you enjoy. All right, so we're going to be using the Reddit JSON API, which we can see pretty easily by simply just going and hitting that endpoint. So if we go to reddit.com/r/JSON or /r/all.json, we'll actually see what the response looks like, right? And so all is basically requesting all posts, all subreddits. If we were to type in a subreddit instead of all, we'd actually see only posts for that subreddit, right? And this API actually has all of the query params as well. So if you just kind of look down here right now, you can see it's a ton of different, it's a lot of info, right? I mean, it looks like a bunch of different posts. I'm not actually sure exactly how many it is, but for instance, if we just say limit equals 1, we'll actually only get one of the children here. So it's not necessarily an array. It looks like it returns an object, and then it has a data object, and inside that data object it has children, right? And so the children appear to be the posts themselves, and each post is an object as well that has a data object. And so we'll be able to sort that out a little bit better later when we actually create our models and everything, but we have to know that we will be hitting this endpoint. When we're doing this, there is an issue. If we try and use something like fetch to request it from the front end, we're going to hit a CORS problem. We're going to have a CORS issue. Reddit doesn't like it. It doesn't like the cross-domain, cross-origin requests, right? So we need to request it from a backend. So we can either build our own API and request the information from there, kind of use our API as a pass-through to go to Reddit. Or we can, with Next, we can actually use get server-side props, which is a special function that allows us to basically use on our server, request information, and then use that information to render our page. We're going to go through both methods right now. I think we're going to start with the client-side fetch. So we're actually going to have to create our own API. I want you guys to experience, creating an API in Next. And then we're going to redo it using get server-side props, and then we're going to continue forward with that, moving with all the parts that, like after this part. We're going to keep using the get server-side props. So kind of a little bit of both. Whatever your flavor is, you can use it. You can use whichever one you like more. Personally, for an app like this, I would probably recommend using the get server-side props. And then especially for any app that you're using that requires SEO, you really want to render your page when it's requested. You want all the info rendered on that page, right? And so doing the get server-side props allows for that. You're not making any front-end requests after the page is served. And so especially with how fast servers are nowadays and deployments and using like something like Vercel or Netlify, things are deployed so quickly. Everybody's speed and internet using gigabit and whatnot is so fast. The whole server-side rendering really isn't a big deal. And so, again, we're going to go through both methods just so that you can use whichever one you want. There are use cases where the client-side fetching is better. And so, again, we're going to go through both. So we'll start with that. And just for consistency's sake, we're going to use something called isomorphic fetch, which is going to allow us to basically use fetch the same whether it's on the front end or the back end, right? And so it's just really easy. It abstracts that out and allows us to just make the same call, and it just makes our lives a little bit simpler, right? So we're going to do npm I isomorphic fetch -- save. All right, so now we have that. If we check our package.json, it will show that it is there. Isomorphic fetch 3.0.0. All right, so we're going to need to import that. We're going to go to pages, index, and right here we can just literally import isomorphic fetch. And what that's going to do is isomorphic fetch, we're actually going to use anything from it. We're not using any of its exports, but when we import it, it's going to replace the window fetch with its own module, right? So whether it's in Node or on the client side in the browser. All right, so now that we have our isomorphic fetch, we can go ahead and we can start constructing our API. So over here, we have something called hello.ts, right? And this is basically Next. It's like a scaffolding just template for your Next route handler. And what it means is that Next creates this API folder, and now any request that we make to /API/ whatever the file name is, it's going to actually receive that request, right? And so in this case, if you were to hit the /API/hello endpoint, it's going to actually go through this handler here, right? And no matter whether it's a get, post, put, whatever it is, it's going to hit this function. And so we're not going to need this. We're going to go ahead and delete this, and we're going to create our own folder or file called Reddit.ts. All right, and now what we're doing in this Reddit.ts file is we're going to have to create our own handler, right? And so first we're going to want to import our Next types, right? So Next API request and Next API response. All right, and that's from Next. And then we're going to also, oops, sorry about that. We're going to export a default function. And in this, we're going to have our Next API request and our Next API response. All right, so then in here, I think best practice for using with Next is honestly just to do a switch statement. You don't have to do this, but it's honestly probably the cleanest and quickest way to do it. And we're going to handle the get case, right? By default, I like kind of just scaffolding out my switch statements. So if we don't receive a get, we're going to want to send a 404, I believe. Yeah, 404 would work. All right, and then in this get method, what we need to do is we need to receive the request, and we basically need to kind of pass through the query. Now, we're going to want to use Next query, the Reddit query params that are available, and we kind of want it to act as a pass-through, right? And so whatever somebody actually requests, like on our own front end, we want to pass those query params through, right? And so we're going to need a search term for a subreddit as well. And so we could use something just like S, we could use search, whatever you really want to use. I'm going to use S, but at first, since we're using TypeScript, let's go ahead and kind of create our models folder. All right, and in this models folder, we're going to, actually, sorry, let's name it types. All right, types folder, and then the file will name models.d.ts. All right, so it's a declaration file, so we use a .d.ts file. Now, in your models.d.ts, we can actually declare a module, and again, I'm going to use models so that anywhere in our app we can just say models dot, and then we can reference the interface, right? And so looking at Reddit's API here, it looks like they have an after, a before, a count, and a limit, right? And so if we wanted to paginate Reddit responses, we really need after and before. They're both strings. And then if we wanted to actually use Reddit with additional query params, let's see, interface, we'll just call it Reddit query params. It's basically the paginated response with its additional query params, so I paginate Reddit. So we wanted to extend that, and we want to have count, which is a number, and then we have limit, which is a number, right? After and before are going to be IDs, so it's basically after that ID or before that ID, right? And now we need our own interface as well. So let's just say interface I get Reddit posts. It's going to extend iReddit query params, and we're just going to say S, right? So we may want to manipulate this. I'm going to make it optional. We may want to delete it off an object later on. So for now, we're going to go ahead and make that optional, right? It's not super necessary. So we're going to go back here, and we're going to say that we're going to get our const query equals request.query, all right? and we want to cast it to iGetReddit post, right? And so it's kind of strange. You kind of have to cast it to unknown first, and then you can say models to iGetReddit post. There may be a way around that. We might have to just define iGetReddit post a little bit differently, but for consistency's sake and just honestly for speed's sake, we're going to just go with that. And then we're going to say let subreddit equals query.s, right? So now we have our actual subreddit. Now, if we don't have our subreddit, we kind of want it to default to all, right? And so I could do something just like if not subreddit, but you know, we're better than that, guys. Let's go ahead and like create some helper functions real quick. So let's go ahead and create a new folder. We'll call it utils, and then we're going to create an index.ts file. All right, basically what this utils file is going to contain, it's going to contain all of our exported constants and whatnot. So let's see, we're going to need our base URL, and that's going to be reddit.com. All right, and then we're going to have our subreddit path, and that's just going to be /r/, right? So basically that's going to be the path that specifies that this is a subreddit that we're looking for. We're going to have our all post constant, which is just all, and then we're going to have our suffix as well. Right, so that's just our .json suffix. And so we have, you know, basically you can kind of see the path being built here. We have our base URL plus our subreddit plus our subreddit path, right, which indicates that it's subreddit. We have our actual subreddit, which is going to be built in, and then we have our suffix, which is added on after the subreddit. Then let's see, we can create a function. We kind of want to check if the subreddit's empty, right? So let's just create an actual isNill function right now. So we're going to return object equals null or type of object, right? So if it's null or undefined, it is nil. And then we can have a function is empty that basically extends this. So we return object equals empty string or is nil object, right? So more or less extends the isNill function. And then two other things is like objects and arrays. We're probably gonna at some point gonna want to check whether something is an object or an array. So we can do export function is object, and you can honestly use something like Lodash as well. You know, in this particular case, we don't need all the functionality of Lodash. So you know, if it's only a few helper functions that you need, you might as well just write your own. It's not worth adding some giant library if you don't need it. But again, you could copy and paste these functions from other people as well. Like, you know, these aren't exact. I mean, it's kind of like there's multiple implementations of all of these, and so it's a little bit of a personal preference. But generally, this is how I like to check for these. This is a little bit of a weird one, to be honest. I've always used this for years. But I use the object of prototype toString.call, or I call the function on object, right? So object's actually the, you're calling it for this object, this actual prototype, right? So you're basically running the toString function on the object, and if it returns object array, then you know it's an array, right? All right, because if it's an array, the toString method will actually return that. All right, basically the object becomes the this of this call. And let's see. One more thing we could do here, since in this Reddit function, we're going to want to actually serialize this query at some point, turn it back into a query because we're using it as a pass-through. Let's do a serialize query function as well. Right, so in here, we're going to say this is going to be our query string, and now we can actually use one of our helper functions. If not as object to object, then we want to return toString, right? We just want to return empty string. Now, otherwise, we want to actually create a let's see, an array here. It's going to be a string array, and then we're going to actually loop through our object keys, right? So P is going to be a key, and we're going to push for each key. we're going to push this string here, right? So it's going to actually be p equals, it's going to be the key equals the key value, right? So object p. Oops, there we go. All right, so basically this is your key. If your object contains a key, let's say s, right, for our search, we find s in object, s equals the value of the object at s, right? So that should work. If qr.length is greater than 0, we're going to basically append to our q string here, right? So we're going to say, we're going to add the question mark in here because might as well, it's part of the query string. And we can say qr.join, we're going to join all of these array elements together with the ampersand. Perfect. All right. And then we're going to just return q string. All right. So that's our serialized query function. And it looks good. So in here, we're going to actually import a couple things, right? Let's see, utils, there we go. We want to import our serialized query function, our base URL, our subreddit path, our all posts, and our suffix, right? We're going to use all of these. Oh, and we want the isEmpty call, right? IsEmpty, right? So if isEmpty subreddit equals the all posts. All right, now we can actually do a fetch call. So this query, we're going to want to serialize this query, right? So before we serialize it, we might as well delete our own custom parameters in here. So we want to remove s because we're the ones that are going to be sending up s. So we don't want to pass s through to Reddit. It probably wouldn't do anything, so it wouldn't be a big deal. But just in case, you don't want us to kind of mess up that data, right? All right, so we're gonna await our fetch call, and in here is where we're actually gonna build this URL, right? So we're gonna have the base URL, we're gonna subreddit path, right, /r/, then we're gonna have our actual subreddit after that. And finally our suffix, and then after that, we're gonna serialize our query, and it's just the remaining query object, right? So it's always a good idea to console.log this just to make sure that it's going to the right place, but if we do everything right, we may not have to. But if there's any problems, that would probably be the first thing I do, right? So our JSON response is going to be models. Well, we don't actually know. It's going to be a Reddit response, right? And so for now, we can just await response.json. And we're going to want to check for that model, res.status 200.send jres, right? So at some point, we're going to want to define these models. And also, we're going to want to wrap everything in kind of like a try-catch block as well. So never forget your try-catch blocks. A little bit of error handling. We can just put this whole thing in the try block, all right? And then we can catch it, and in the case of an error, we'll just console.log it, just see what happens for now, and we can remove that at production if we want, and we'll just say that we're gonna send back a 400 response, right? Something went wrong. Now this model itself, we know we're gonna actually want a model at some point for this, so let's just say interface Reddit response. All right, we saw that at some point, and then we can actually log it to get a little bit better of an idea. But we're gonna have an iReddit response, and then we're also gonna have an iReddit post too. So interface. All right, so this is obviously going to be what this is, models.iReddit response. All right, and then for now, let's go ahead and console.log this. All right, just so that we can actually build out our model, because we don't actually know what it is yet. We don't know what Reddit's going to come back with. All right, so now that we have our API, we're actually ready to hit it from the front end. So we're going to want to actually pull up our index. And in our index, we are going to create we're going to use use effect, right? So we're going to, on load, we're going to want to use a use effect, and we're going to actually put these into the list, right? Now our list isn't actually accepting anything at the moment. So we have to do a little bit to our list real quick. So we're going to go to our list component over here, components, list, and it's doing nothing at the moment. But what we can do is we can basically create an iProps interface. And we're going to say that we're going to pass in the post that's going to render. So this is going to be models.iRedditPost array. And in here, this is what's going to be passed in, and this is iProps. And I know I made that mistake. This is actually post. There we go. And we're going to say that if, let's import, well, it'll import for us. It should at least array. So if not is array, there we go. Import it for us. Post. You know, or we could actually check here if the post.length is 0, right? So, or post.length equals 0. We can actually render something that says post not found. Now, since we are fetching from the front end though, let's not put this in there yet, because there is some problems around that. Like basically, since we're fetching the front end, there's going to be a slight delay, right? And so the page will load. We don't want it to load with the no post found, right? Because it still has to make the request from the front end. So we'll just say if it's not an array, then we're going to want to return a div here, and it just says, you know, put a span in there, say no post found, little frowny face, and we'll give some classes in here. Let's see, we'll use, you know, a couple Tailwind classes, put some padding on the top. We'll center everything, and we'll make the text small. All right, so saying if it's not an array, then we're going to say no post found, or we could even say error, right? Because, for instance, you know, we passed in something that wasn't an array, right? But in this case, we'll just say no post found. Instead, if there are posts found, then let's go ahead and figure out what we want to do in that case, right? So we can say, let's just say we want to kind of center all the posts themselves. So we want to limit the max width here, and then we want to center that. So max width 2XL. This sets the container width to be these, I forget, it's a certain number of rems. And then we're saying MX auto is margin auto on both sides, so it's going to center that. We're going to say padding top 1 and padding bottom 10, right? And that'll give us a little bit of space on top and then some space on the bottom. So then we're going to have our container div that's going to actually map the posts. Oh, we need our actual braces. And we'll use P here. And in here, we'll actually grab, we don't know what the model is yet. So let's go ahead, and for now, we're going to just leave it like this. We'll come back to this page in a second. And then we're going to say that in here, we want to actually import, or we're gonna grab the post, and then we're gonna pass them in, right? So we need to use state and use effect. All right. And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to say post and set post, and it's going to be use state. Bam. There we go. Function call. All right. So now we have our actual use state, and we're going to need to create a function to actually get the post. So it's an async function. So let's see. Create a little variable called get post, assign it to an async function. Do a little try catch block because it is going to be a fetch call, and we'll say that the res equals await fetch from our /API/Reddit, right? All right, and then our actual Reddit response, which is going to be models.iReddit response equals res.json. and then we're going to set posts to something. We don't know. We assumed, I remember it had something, it was something children. I think it was .data.children, but again, we're going to want to check that, right? If there's an error, let's just log it to the console for now just to see what may have gone wrong. We don't know if anything's going to go wrong, but we're just thinking ahead here. All right, and then we're going to use a use effect, and we're going to say there's no dependencies, so it's only going to run once, and we'll say get posts. All right, so now we actually have posts. We're going to be setting the posts, and then we can pass in the posts here like this. So post equals post, all the errors are gone. TypeScript's awesome with telling you what's wrong there. And yeah, so now when we run this, let's go ahead and npm run dev. All right, so we're going to go to localhost 3000, open up our Chrome tools. And again, we have nothing yet, right? But we do have something logged to our console, which is nice, right? So this is the actual response that we're getting. It looks like there's a kind and then there's data. So let's go and actually update our model over here. So we're going to go to types. And this is actually our Reddit response here, right? So we have kind, which is a string, and then we have data, which is an object, right? And inside data, we have after, which is going to be important. We have something called dist, mod hash, geofilter. Let's put the important ones for now. I don't really even know what dist is, but we'll put it in there, and then we'll say children, which is going to be a Reddit post array, right? That's going to be your children. That's all the objects. Those are all the posts. Oh, and then we also have the before. Right, so we have after, before, dist. Honestly, we could probably remove dist. I'm not really sure. That might be the number of children. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't know. Might be. Let's see. Anyway, math is hard. Not in the mood right now. It's something around that. But anyway, that's our iReddit response. And then if we wanted to go ahead and, let's see, what do we got an error here for? Its value is never read. Okay, well that's not important right now. But we do know that now we can set posts to Reddit response .data.children, right? Doesn't like this, so we have to actually give it a type here. iReddit post array. Right? And what do we got here? Kind, I promise of any kind. Fetch our response. Doesn't like something. Let's see. Let's see. Reddit response. We'll go ahead and just put these question marks in here just in case, but we should be good as far as that goes. But again, let's see, fetch is always love it when this stuff happens. Type errors are not the funnest thing, to be honest. Well, for now, we'll come back to that in a second. Let's go ahead and just log data.children0 just to kind of get whatever's going on in there. All right, so now we can see a pretty big object here that's kind and also data. All right, so the Reddit post itself is also an object that has a string for kind, and then it has an object for data. It looks like we have a subreddit. Whoa. There we go. We have a title. All right. Subreddit name prefixed. I mean, that could save us some effort, but or we could just add /r ourselves if we wanted to even post that, to be honest. We don't have to. Let's see, thumbnail name, that might be important. Subreddit type could be important. Now you guys can go through this and kind of use your own judgment, and you know, whenever you're designing your cards, you might want to use something different, right? So thumbnail looks important, and let's see, created, you might want to know when it was created. Let's see, URL, permalink looks pretty good. That looks like how we could actually link to the post itself. So permalink. What else could we use in here? Author could be cool to kind of show the author. Usually I think Reddit does something where it's like, you know, u/author name. So we may want to actually do that. And I think for now that's probably enough. So we're going to go ahead and just shrink this real quick. We're going to go back here and we're going to remove this log, right? And save the files. It's funny because it's not erroring for this type response here, but for whatever reason, promise any is missing the following properties from iRed response: kind and data. Oh, we're just not awaiting. Wow, that was a dumb error. Sorry guys. I'm sure there's a ton of you guys probably screaming at me in the background. You knew it right off the bat. We forgot to put the await in there. Anyway, that would have been a big problem. All right, so now if everything's good, we should actually get and render things to this list. So let's go ahead for now. Let's just say, let's put a div in here, and we're going to post the p.data, or you know what, let's actually create a p.data variable, right? And then we'll say p.data.title. Oh, title, meant to put title. All right, and then this is, we're gonna make sure we have a key in here. And you know what, I'm pretty sure there had to be an ID as well. So in our model, we probably forgot to actually put the ID of the post. So there's definitely an ID. It's a string ID. That's what the before and after uses. So we'll say p.data.id in here. And then we have that unique ID for these keys. So we gotta return this. Don't forget that. That's an error that I seem to make all the time. I don't know why. Everybody has their little errors they make commonly. I always forget to return the JSX or TSX. All right, so let's go ahead and just see what happens now. All right, so now we have a list of all these titles. So we're getting close. Now we just need to style some cards here. So instead of just returning, you know, this div here, we want to make it a link, right? So let's turn it to an anchor tag, and we're gonna add a class name, and we can actually add a whole bunch of stuff here. So we're probably gonna have some stuff inside that's gonna be absolutely positioned. So let's make this relative. Let's say that we're gonna round the corners. Let's add a border, and we're gonna make it a gray border, right? Let's add a white background. Let's add some padding on the sides and some paddings on the top and bottom. I like the little box shadows. You don't have to put those, but I kind of like that. Let's make the insides flexbox. You know, why not? I used to hate flexbox back in the day, and it's growing on me now. Now that the browsers handle them better, flexbox seems to, you know, definitely help with fast development, especially. So let's on hover. So Tailwind has a really cool ability where if you just put hover : in front of any class, it'll actually apply that. And before our hover class, I don't know why I like putting a lot of those pseudo classes at the end there, but we're going to add some margin on the top and bottom to kind of space those cards out. All right, so now we actually have to add an our actual href in here. So href equals, let's see, let's check. I don't know for sure if that permalink is going to always exist. So if it doesn't exist, let's just add the base URL. So we're just going to send you to Reddit. Otherwise, we're going to actually use the permalink, right? We want it to send you somewhere. All right. Let's see. We have our key here. Let's make sure that we do, target blank. So let's see, href key target equals blank. And then for linting purposes, Next just really likes to make sure that you put this rel in there and it's no refer. So that's for all target blanks. You just want to actually have no refer in there. All right, so that should be good for the outside of our anchor tag. Now we want to add that image as a thumbnail, and we also want to put the title in here. So let's tackle the actual thumbnail first. So we're gonna have our div. It's gonna contain an image. Let's just use flex strength 0 for this, and we're going to add a class name here, and we're gonna say h10. And let's see, our source is gonna actually be the thumbnail link, right? But we don't actually know if all posts have a thumbnail either, so we may actually want to create a helper function for that. So let's come back to that. Let's add our title in there first. So let's see, or at least our title and other information that we want to put in there. So class name, we want this one to actually be a little bit more flexed, right? So the thumbnail is small, everything else is large. Min width of 0. And we want to do a little paragraph here. Let's do text small. This is going to be our title, font medium, and text gray 900. So this is going to be pretty dark, but not quite. Oh, it did not like that. I put a space in there. Put a bunch of spaces in there. There we go. That's another thing I tend to do quite a bit. There we go. That's what I was trying to do. All right, and then pdata.title, and then we're going to actually have, we can actually put the author in here. So let's make the author extra small, a little bit lighter, so text rate 500, and we're going to truncate just in case. So we don't want to take up more than one line. This is going to add a little ellipsis to it if it spans too far. And in here, what we can do is we can kind of do the whole u/pdata.author idea, right? So it's basically user/author name. And all right, so that should be cool. Now the only thing we have to do is handle this thumbnail. So let's go ahead and save the file and go back to our utils file and export a function called getThumbnail. All right, and the thumbnail will be a string. Now, what this has to do is has to check if that thumbnail exists, right? We also may want to check if it's an actual proper URL, because maybe for whatever reason Reddit just passes in some empty string or something along those lines. We can't, or maybe it's not empty string, maybe it's just a string, right? But it actually doesn't help us. Like maybe it just says data or something along those lines. So let's make a URL regular expression. And this is just going to check for, if it starts with HTTP, and we'll put the S as an optional. So it's HTTP or HTTPS, and then colon, and then we have to escape our slashes, so // and that will, we want this whole thing to be looked at, right? So again, it's the entire block there, and we'll make it case insensitive as well. So this should handle any URL check. So we can say if is empty thumb or not URL regex.test thumb. Then we just want to return, we'll return our actual logo in here, right? So we have public logos subreddit. So it'll be /logos/subreddit.png, right? Otherwise, we want to return thumb. All right, so then we're going to go ahead and say the source is get thumbnail, and it's going to be pdata.thumbnail. Awesome. And we can just say for the alt post thumbnail. All right, so if we didn't mess something up, which honestly is highly likely that we did, but if we didn't, we should have posts. Awesome. So it actually worked. Very cool. And we should be able to actually use oh, we're not duh, we're not actually passing it up on the front end, right? So in here, you'd actually have to serialize the query also. So we'd actually have to pass the query into the front end here as a param, and we'd have to serialize that query into our fetch to our own backend, right? So this is a whole extra step. This is another problem with doing the fetch on the front end, right? We actually can't use the URL. So if we wanted this to be a total pass-through entity, we could, essentially start fetching them from the back end, all right? So what we can do is we're going to just, for now, we're going to remove all of this, right? So we're now no longer going to be fetching these on the front end. We're going to move this to be all on the back end, all right? So Next has something called a get server-side props, right? So we're going to export const, and it actually looks for this function, get server-side props, so it has to be spelled exactly like this, and we can't change. We have to have all the the case. It's case sensitive, everything, right? So you have to make sure you get that right. But it's an async function, and there's also in next page there is an actual get server side props type. So we can define this get server side props. All right. Now it doesn't like this because we're not returning anything, So what we want to do is we're going to want to, if we return the object itself, the props object, now it doesn't, it doesn't mind it anymore, right? So we want to know what we're actually returning here. So let's define our interface props, and we can say that we're going to return the entire post response, right? And so this is actually going to be a models.iReddit response. And who knows, we might want to do something with the entire response. So here we can do our little try catch block. And if we error, then maybe we want to return post-res is null, right? All right, but if we don't error, let's see, we can grab the query. So we'll say const query equals context.query. All right, so Next actually passes this through to you. And then we can do basically the exact same thing that we did in the API. Now we're not going to be using this API anymore. We're not going to be hitting it. It's going to be useless. We could delete it if we wanted to. We'll leave it in there. And maybe in the future we may want to actually use it for something, maybe additional front-end requests. We could render the page and then do additional front-end requests after that for updating the post. That's also a possibility. You could use a combination, which is a pretty cool way to attack it since we wouldn't have to reload the page. But for now, we're going to basically do the exact same thing as that API. You could abstract out this function into your utils class. Not always the smartest thing to do for this. You might have to you might want to do a separate utils file that you would import for this functionality, but that would be a good idea so you don't repeat code. Repeating code is the worst. We're looking at this from the standpoint of if you didn't have this Reddit file at all, you would be writing this code here, right? So delete query.s, and then we're going to actually do the fetch call here. So const response equals await fetch, and then it's going to be the exact same path as before. I'm not going to pull this. I'm going to just copy and paste this because it's kind of a pain to write. All right, and then we need to actually import all these, so I'm going to end up doing all this anyway. But subreddit path, suffix, and serialized query, bam. All right, so it imported all this for us. Visual Studio Code, pretty awesome thing. And we're going to get this JSON response, which is a models.iReddit response equals await. We're not going to forget that await this time. Response.json. Finally, we're going to return our object. We can just go ahead, copy and paste this. Well, we've got two returns. Let's delete that. And it's going to be JRes. Awesome. So now we have no more errors. We do have an error down here. Post no longer likes posts anymore, right? So it's no longer a post. Oh, we don't have anything there. That variable doesn't even exist. So what we want to do is we want to say post res, and then this is going to be iprops, and then this actually takes in a generic, right? So now there's no more errors. Next page, you can see, takes in a generic. We just need to specify the props for that. There we go. Specify, or it takes care of all that. Everything looks good. And finally, we're going to say that this is going to be postres.data.children, right? Awesome. So now, since list should be actually the same, if we go to list, right, we're checking if not as array, or at this point now what we can do is we can actually add post.length equals 0 here too, because now we know that the actual posts are going to be delivered on render, right? So we know if the post.length is 0, then it actually is no post found, as opposed to just, not being an array. So that should actually be taken care of, and everything should look good now. We're not actually using styles in here. I like to leave it in there in case maybe we do, but this list is fully built out. You could go ahead and delete that and delete the file as well. It's not really needed. But if you wanted to kind of later on make this thing a little bit more intricate, you might want it or need it, right? So let's go ahead and make sure this is still running, compiled successfully. And we're going to see that, let's reload the page. Bam. All right, so now it's actually fetching from the server side, and because of that, it should actually pass through the entire query as well. So limit 1, and look at that, awesome. Limit 2, very cool. So it does reload the page, but it reloads it with everything that's needed, and it passes through the query perfectly. All right, now one other thing that I wanted to go through that may help later on. Let's pull this back up. We have a lot of code in here that's pretty ugly, and it's kind of getting hard to read. And we did install Prettier early on, and then we never actually set it up or used it. So what we can do is we can create our npm script format, and we'll call the way that we use it is you can look up Prettier's documentation. Let's see, they have a log level, and then we have to actually write to the files that we want to format. So we have components, we have pages, spaces aren't necessary. The braces allow us to kind of group multiple folders together, and then we can say everything in those folders that have the suffixes or the file types of ts and tsx, right? So make sure we add a little semicolon there. Save that. We're done using this. npm run format. All right, so if we look back at our list now, it went ahead and made everything look a little bit prettier based off of our actual Prettier RC file that we specified, our JSON file. And it actually did all of our files, right? So our index as well. But that's, again, we built an API, and now we should be good to kind of move on. Make sure we actually check in our code here, and we're good for the next part. All right, guys, see you next time. All right, so hope you guys enjoyed the 2 different ways of actually retrieving the post from Reddit. I know it was a long video, and I really hope you guys were able to stick with us. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the button below. We're going to be putting out more parts, more content, and again, hope you guys are able to use this and hope you learned something today. See you later.